Entonces, okay, eso. Bueno, I like to start with the festival right now and then start a little walking back and having a more broadly wide view of everything, if that's okay with you. And one of the questions they have here, and I think is interesting, is how do you measure the success of a festival? How do you, more than the crowd numbers and that?
Yes. So the interesting thing is that there are so many different parameters that we need to look at in order to measure the festival's success. Because although audience attendance figures are important, and they are, I think, also a genuine measure of success, we want to reach many people and we want to reach many different kinds of people. And we like to have broad and diverse demographics within the audience. So that is in a way a true measure of our success, I think, but it's not the only one, of course. And I think for Jessie Mill, who co-directs the festival together with me, one important measure is how relevant the festival is for local arts communities, for the people who work in dance and in theater here in Montreal. Do they come to the festival? Do they feel they are represented in the festival? And do they think that the aesthetics and the subjects that are presented within the festival are relevant to them and can sort of open doors for them? And that goes beyond just what they see. It also goes into how they are involved. Do they take on a role maybe as moderator for a post-show discussion? Is there a panel discussion that brings together an international artist with a national artist? How are they involved in the festival in many different ways?
And that's a good thing because I was seeing the history of the festival and what's going on with the pandemic, and I saw that they have, well, you have, I understand you still not in the part of the artistic direction at
Yes.
that time,
Yes.
but I don't know if that still gets through to like I don't know, like an axis or something, because I understand they have like this festival where only Canadian small, sobre todo,
Sí, decirlo en español si quieres.
¿cómo no, Quebecois
Ah,
artists
sí, 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 sí.
were in place at the
Yeah.
2021, I thought.
Yeah, exactly.
And do you think that is a thing that still
Mm,
impregnate the festival today, or
mm,
that
mm,
was happening before?
mm, mm, mm. So the festival has a pretty long history because it started in 1985, and I cannot speak for the entirety of that history. But what I do know is that for a very long time, the presence of artists from Quebec and Canada has made up half of the program, roughly. And that's quite important, and that has been important since before the pandemic. So that was not a new thing. During the pandemic, from what I understood, well, actually, I was there as a spectator for the pandemic edition, so I can speak from that point of view. Canada's borders were closed, so you could not invite an artist to present their work unless that artist had a work permit for Canada. And the festival actually tried to get work permits for some artists to come. They tried to get work permits for the Syrian artists Mohamed Al-Attar and Omar Abu Sada, so they could stage their work Aleppo, but it didn't work. The work permit was refused, and so they had to create the work at a distance. So they worked with actors on Zoom, and the actors presented the work here at the festival. So that edition was mainly national artists, but also two works made from a distance. This one, the Syrian one, Aleppo, and another one by Kate McIntosh, who is an artist from New Zealand who lives in Brussels, and the piece is called Work Table, and that was also made with the artist in Europe on Zoom and making the performance.
Okay, and that's also an important part of festival that they do produce your own shows, or well, not own shows. You
Mm.
produce some shows that there's
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How
Yes.
it works that is for you? How
Yeah.
do you measure the success of them? Then continue to be
Oh,
working after?
yes. Yes, exactly. So, as I said, half of the festival is national work, and most of those performances are co-produced by the festival and they have their premiere at the festival. Not in 100% of the cases, but really most of them. So there are exceptions. But we feel it's important to co-produce the work, which basically means that we pay a co-production fee in advance and we write letters of support for the artists many years in advance so they can then apply for public funding at the arts councils in Montreal, in Quebec, and in Canada. And those letters, I believe, I hope, are actually helpful for the artists. So that's a way of supporting local arts communities for us. Um, these plays and these performances and shows then premiere at the festival. So there's an element of risk taking,
Mm-hmm.
which we think is great. We think we should carry that risk together with the artists in solidarity. Um, we know it puts a certain amount of pressure on the artists, so we try to support them as best we can, finding the right space for them, being in discussion with them about dramaturgical matters if that's what they want, giving technical support if that's what they want, helping them find residencies if that's what they want. And then we actually do measure success also in different ways for these performances. So again, audience figures, attendance is important. And then there is reviews within the festival, of course. But then there is also another measure, which is, we bring in well, this year it was like 180 presenters from all around the world. So these are people who come to see shows and then present them at their festivals and venues. And we ask the companies, the Quebec and Canadian companies, to give us information throughout the whole year about bookings that they have after the festival. And so I can sort of give you an average number of what that means in terms of economic impact for these artists. And it's $1.5 million every year, more or less, like it varies a bit. But those are the fees generated for the artists after
For
FTA.
each production.
No, total.
Ah, no.
For all of the 1 year. And so when I say 1 year, that means productions from different years of FTA, of course,
Ah,
because it can be a show that premiered this year, a show from last year, a show from 2 years ago, even sometimes 3 years ago. But so in 1 year, the festival helps generate $1.5 million for the artists in artists' fees directly. So that's also, it's a very economical
oh,
measure,
it's a good
but
measure.
it's not bad.
And it shows that they are still working and working different places. And
Exactly. Yeah.
in that sense, sorry. um, in that sense, I have another of these questions that
Yeah.
remind me because of about the trends. If performing art right now is
Yeah.
what are the trends and what festivals is like to be they expected to be a trendsetters, or
Uh.
how do you establish yourself in that round?
Yeah, so like of course I know there is something like trends or something like maybe zeitgeist or something like issues that artists are working on, but I think both Jesse and I are very cautious um, when it comes to these trends and our role within it. We both think that an important part of our work is being very suspicious of our own gaze and our own intuitions. And because we know that our gaze is structured by our education, which has been very Eurocentric, for example, and very white-centric. And so we need to question ourselves about what we easily accept as a trend. And so lots of the discussions between Jesse and me, and that's where it's very interesting that there's two of us, because we
Mm-hmm.
could question each other because every artistic choice we have to make together. And yeah, so I think we were aware of our role within trend setting. We're aware of our role as gatekeepers also. That's another way of speaking about the power and the privilege that festival directors have. Yeah, but we try to find a complex and nuanced way of working with that. Yeah, like we hope that the festival has some kind of a political stance that can question what a trend even is.
That's about the political stance. Also, I think well, it's shown that the whole history of the FTA has
Yeah,
this. I What I can see from
yeah,
side, I perceive this an artistic project. The festival itself.
yes,
It's not like a festival born for modern needs or
yeah, yeah.
like an artistic project, and it
Mm,
maintains itself like that, like being with political issues, standings, and
yeah,
from the beginning. And now
yes,
they have been different directors now, but I
yes.
think that you're still trying to
Mm,
keep that.
mm, mm, mm.
Uh,
Yeah, it's an important part of the festival's identity, I think. And it's one that you have to constantly rework and re-articulate and examine. But that's part of the fun, really. That's, otherwise, otherwise, why would we be doing this?
I know you know a lot of festivals, not just this one that you're currently directing, but you have worked in many festivals and be part of this international community. Um, how do you feel the FTA is in this kind of
Mm,
overview?
mm,
And
mm,
if you think that these changes that it have has in the
mm,
time, it
mm,
makes it like more uh, present and
mm,
having refresh itself. I
mm, mm.
That would be a
Yeah. Again, like I can't really judge what it was like before my time. So I can mainly speak to what I perceived when I was in Germany looking at FTA, and then now since I'm part of it here. Um, what I think is interesting in my work in festivals is the specificity of each one, how they are different, and how that specificity is based on an analysis of the ecosystem that's in place. An ecosystem that consists of many different players. There are local arts communities, international artists visiting maybe other institutions, the different scales of arts institutions in the city, whether there is, for example, an arts university in the city or not, that makes like a huge difference. How journalism works in that city, who the main arts critics are, makes a difference in the city. What is the conversation around contemporary performing arts? And so the festivals I admire in the world are often very specific and often also not so large, because they interact with a very specific need in their community. And so two festivals I like best, or three maybe, if I may mention three of them. One of them is called Dream City in Tunis, which is a festival for dance in the old part of this Arabic town. So a festival that does not take place in the theaters. The theaters are part of the colonial town. This takes place inside the Medina, the old part of the town. So the performances are on rooftops and in mausoleums and in libraries and, all these different places. So that's like very specific, very tailored to the city. And there's a festival on the Azores in the middle of the Atlantic called Walk and Talk, which really also interacts with the local economy and ecology of the arts, which I also think is really special, because they are so isolated, but also such an important connecting point. And yeah, being on an island means you have to deal with resources in a different way. And then there's a third one that's also really dear to Jessie because she's been there many, 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 many times, and I've only been there once. But there's a festival in Burkina Faso on the African continent called Les Récréatrales, in Ouagadougou, which is as much a hub for well, education in the arts. So workshops and writing, writing workshops and all kinds of like laboratories to create new plays as it is a festival. So it's like 1 year they have all kinds of workshops, and then 1 year they have a festival. And the next year is workshops, and the next year is a festival. That's their way of working. And that's also like very specific to the exact place where it is. So that's what I like. And we try to look at FTA, although it's like a bigger machine. We like to look at it with regards to the needs and the potentials that we identify in the city and in the region and then in the larger region. Yeah, that's what we try.
I'm just still trying to connect with your city and
Yeah, yeah,
your
yeah.
community. So you have this
Yeah.
specificity too.
Yeah. But like with the city, that's important. But sorry, just to expand, like it's also about how the performing arts circulate within North America, because that's very different from how they circulate within Latin America, for example, or Europe or Asia. Like it works in a different way. So that's also always something we're aware of.
And one thing you were talking about, what you and your invites, we were talking about in this festival kind of double run that you made, is about this francophone culture and how
Yeah.
you have this kind of line with Africa,
Yeah,
and I
exactly.
saw it also in the program in this festival. You have a lot of
Mm. Yeah, that's
so.
true. Yeah, yeah. And the place that language has in this festival is also like quite interesting to us because of course the French language connects us to different parts of the world, say on the African continent. But in some way, there's a friend of ours, Diego Aramburo from
Yeah.
Bolivia, who always says that Quebec is part of Latin America because we speak French. So that's also like an interesting, an interesting connection to have. Um, and this reflection on what languages we use in the festival and how that connects us to the rest of the world really comes into play also with regards to indigenous languages here. Because when we started, Jesse and I, 4 years ago, 5 years ago now, um, one of our first impulses was that we wanted to have lots of indigenous languages on stage. We were like, this is obvious, that's what we need. And so we started talking to people and trying to find out how to do this. And it became clear that it was really not that easy. It was not only about us giving space or us providing resources, it was a much larger issue around who even speaks which languages, how many languages there are, artists who are now relearning their languages because they were not transmitted from their grandparents to their parents to them. And all these things take time. It's not like you can just organize a workshop and then everybody writes in indigenous languages. It takes years and years and years and years. And that's a regret we have, certainly, that we were not able to take this forward more quickly. But we still believe it's one of the important things to do here.
And do you have like a plan, or you're working out something in this long-term issue? Do you have?
Yeah, well, we have had a few productions that have incorporated indigenous languages, so there were parts. For example, Émilie Monet, an artist from here, has collaborated with an artist from Colombia. Émilie Monet is Anishinaabe, and the artist from Colombia, Wairanina, is Inga, so she's from the Amazon part of Colombia. And they made a performances in 5 languages: French and English and Spanish, because Spanish was the language they used between the two of them, and Anishinaabe and Inga. So there were indigenous languages, but it was not like the whole production was in those languages. And there was another case of an artist from the Inuit, so from the far north, who speaks her language very well, Inuktitut, like she's totally fluent, as many Inuit people are, because to some degree, their culture and language were protected from colonialism because they're far away, not in every respect. There was lots of destruction anyway, but Inuktitut is still very much alive. And we co-produced a play, and we were like, this has to be an Inuktitut, and she didn't want it to be, because she said that when I am in Montreal speaking to audiences here, I need to speak a language that they understand. And she's also completely fluent and in fact very eloquent and articulate in English. She's as interesting a poet in English as in Inuktitut. And so she really wanted her performance to be in English, because that's the way she can address issues in an understandable way. And so, for us, we need to follow the artist.
And I noticed you have this other program that like give grants. I understand
Yes,
some
yes, yes.
artists,
Yeah.
Quebecois artists.
Yes.
Yeah. And
So,
yes, so ahead, please.
sorry.
No, no. I don't need to ask you already.
Okay. So this started during the pandemic with our predecessor, Martin Fauché, before Jessie and I became artistic directors. And it's called Respiration, which means breath, respirations. And it was really a way of supporting the arts communities during these very difficult times. We were very lucky because the public funding authorities here in Quebec specifically, and also in Canada, but Quebec has very consistent public funding compared to other provinces in Canada. So there were subsidies during the pandemic to make up for lost box office income. But the festival was cancelled in 2020 because it was not allowed to happen. And in 2021, as you said, we had like an almost national edition of the festival. So it was not as expensive as other festivals where you have to pay for travel and accommodation. And so that money was used, and that was in those early years, that was a substantial amount of money. That was like $200,000, $300,000 per year. That was used for micro grants for artists, like small subsidies that we could give them. No strings attached. There did not have to be an outcome or a project or anything. It was just to support their practice, because we knew that if the artists drown, the festival cannot happen. So we need to support them. And so now the financial situation is a bit different, because those pandemic subsidies do not exist anymore for the arts institutions. And so the amount we give is smaller now, but we still give a few of these micro grants every year to artists that we want to be in conversation with, even if we're not sure yet if they're going to be presented at the festival.
And do you, I don't know, do you have a view of what happened with that? Do you stay in touch with that
Yeah,
artists, or they
yeah,
make something that you can?
totally. Yeah. And that's in fact one of the very nice things. It's almost like an excuse to be in touch with an artist. So, we give them a bit of money, and then we have an excuse to stay in touch. We have an excuse to say, oh, how are things going? Do you have an open rehearsal? Would you like to talk about something? Because as you know, like Jessie and I, we are paid year round for the work we do. When we meet an artist, we get paid for that because we have a salary. But many artists do not have that kind of salary. So any preparatory work that they do on their projects very often is unpaid, because there's a chunk of work that has to happen before you even put in an application. Before you can even talk to the festival director, the theater director, you have to work on your project. And so the micro grants are also a way of paying that invisible work. And so, we have a good reason then to go like, okay, what have you been doing? Yeah.
And do you have like any response that you like to I don't know, underline that
Yeah,
remarkable.
yeah, totally. Like it's not made to have results. So there
I
are
know,
results, but that's not the primary
I know, I
uh,
know.
idea. But the Inuit artist I was talking about, Lakuluk
Mhm.
Williamson Bathory, that started as a micro grant for whatever she wanted to make. And then with the micro grant money, she was able to start thinking about her show. And she applied then to different funding institutions. And she actually got, like, there's a specific kind of federal funding in Canada called the National Creation Fund. And with FTA's support and the work that she'd been doing on the micro grant, she applied for that money. And then she got that money, and that was like a large sum. And and then it premiered at FTA, and then it had two more stops after that. After FTA, it went to Iqaluit in the far north, which is where Lakuluk lives, and was presented in like a school gymnasium because there's no theater in Iqaluit. So that was like brilliant. And then after that, it went to the National Arts Center in Ottawa, which is like the only national institution for the performing arts. So that's like the best example of how far you can take something, with the small investment that you make in the beginning. But of course, many, investments do not have that trajectory, and that's fine. That's absolutely perfect also.
Yes, because you never know, and you have to spread seeds and see.
Exactly.
And I am asking a lot of this because in Mexico we have this really big issue to make people understand that you don't need to have all the time every grant or every subsidy attached to some results to
Yes,
have
yes.
actually a big result. So I'm
That
very thankful, but yeah, it's a very clear way to
Yeah,
make a path, no?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So there's a lot of artists also in this kind of gestions, but they it's hard to them to how to get money and don't or give money away with
Yes,
anything in return is
yes,
really
yes.
hard. And
Yeah,
even they understand this invisible work, they don't know how to pay it.
that's
So
it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you you have it very clear,
Mm.
and that's also interesting. How do you okay, you know very well all the all the stagecraft and all that happened at back in the backside.
Yeah.
Uh, and how is that this profile do you have? Because it's different. You have to have a critic side, but not also that critic. But you need to have this sensitive artist. No, it's
Mm.
a curator, of course.
Yeah.
But how it compound how do you think you are compose your gaze through this
Mm.
curator? It's like a mix of things, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. It's really a mix, as you say, and it's also always evolving.
Mhm.
Like there is never a fixed state of what I think is interesting or relevant. And, you know, when I look back, I also think that I've made many mistakes because I'm constantly gathering information and finding out and talking to people and understanding better how artists work. And also, I've been doing this for like 15, 20 years. So things change, literally. The political landscape changes, and how artists are educated changes, and how they work together changes. And I really need to stay very alert, I think, in order to keep doing this. um, and before I came here to Montreal, um, like maybe you could describe it as having like different antennae, like, huh? And one antenna that was not very developed in my case before I came here was the arts community's antenna, because in Europe you have an arts landscape that is quite dense. Like there are lots of arts institutions on little space, and there's quite a lot of public funding. And so I did not see the festival I ran in Germany as a service organization, But here in North America, FTA is also a service organization. It's not its first role. It's maybe not its most important role, but it is one important role. And so that antenna had to sort of really grow when I came here. And that's what I think is interesting in my work, the way like different locations, you need to grow different antennae. So now I have like
In that also FTA I think has a lot of antenna because it's
yeah,
the programming is obviously
yeah,
it's the big thing we all see, but
yeah, yeah,
it's happening a lot of stuff we have been talking about here. But also
yeah,
you have another program that is young creators and critics, I think.
yes,
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
and it's how do you find it? Is like an educational program or is not?
Mm-hmm. It's I think it's different things all at the same time, and it really also has a few very basic issues that are quite difficult, I think. It's a so-called watch and talk program, so we invite young artists and also sometimes young critics, but they're more difficult to find. And there's a French-speaking group and there's an English-speaking group, Rencontre Internationale and Conversations on Performance. And for both groups, our wish, our desire as FTA is that these groups should be very diversified and from all over the world, in sort of like a sensible, rational way. They should represent different continents and different ways of working, and they should represent theater and dance and performance art. And, there should be a real diversity in these groups. But the thing is, we cannot offer these programs for free. In some European countries, festivals do that. In fact, in the festival I ran in Germany, that program was free for the artists. We literally invited them and we paid for everything. The way our budget works here, that's not possible. So the artists have to pay for their own flight and their accommodation in Montreal, although we find cheap accommodation for them, and like a very small participation fee. And that is not possible for many, many young artists around the world. And so that's a problem. And so we try to work with that problem by finding funding in different parts of the world, sometimes here in Montreal and sometimes outside Montreal. And that has become more and more difficult because, public funding goes down, but also because for ecological reasons, some partners that we used to have are not willing to fund a participant who does not present their work. They're like, this is just talking. This is not enough. This does not justify, you know, a plane flight and the carbon emissions that go with it. So we lost some partners like that. And then we lost a few partners in terms of, for example, the Institut Français used to fund participants from different African countries because they felt that was part of their post-colonial mission, and they've drawn out of that. And similarly, the British Council has sort of drawn out of funding participants from different countries. So that's funding that is missing now. And that creates a situation where it's a lot more difficult for artists, say from the global south, if that's what you want to call it, to participate in these programs. And every year we work on this. Every year we try to find funding for these participants because we think it's not acceptable that they're not part of it. But it's complicated, and yeah, it's like one of the dilemmas that is built into that program.
Yes, and not everything would be. But do you think that this return have to be with a political issue or with the state right now that is um, regrouping resources because United States and the war in Ukraine and all stuff, OTAN and everything.
I'm not so sure, I think, whether these recent geopolitical issues have an actual impact. I think it's a little bit more long term. Um, but I'm
Right.
not sure.
Okay. Okay. We just saw that it's getting smaller.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, I think it's I don't know. Okay, maybe this. Mm, mm. Ernesto, ya. Um, I think these festivals they are often seen like a very touristic, not very touristic way. Do you think there's something like that in the FTA? How does it?
Well, we have a pretty clear idea of how many so-called tourists we have in our audience. That would be like between 15 and 18%, according to audience surveys that we do. But you need to sort of like, what do we call a tourist?
Yes.
So what's counted is a person from outside of Montreal. Is that really a tourist or is that like a professional visitor? Honestly, I don't know. We know that we have more of these people when we do outdoor performances because, we count people because the outdoor performances are free. And so there are people who did not know that this was happening, and then they see something happening and then they join the audience, and that's great. Like, we love that. But I think the actual touristic impact of FTA is modest. If you compare it sort of to the large music festivals, for example, the Jazz Festival in Montreal, attracts large numbers of people from other countries, other cities. And I think like the kind of contemporary performing arts that we do is like a little more modest in that respect. But, some of it exists still. And if we can develop that, then we're happy to do that.
You were speaking about the ecosystem of every city and how
Yeah.
it works, and I think I don't know that Montreal have a big system of festivals, a lot of festivals
Yeah.
around the city that give
Yeah.
actually some identity to the city.
Yes, that's right.
And how do you feel FTA?
Well, I think in terms of these festivals, and you're right, there are many, many, many. I think there are like two basic categories. I think there's a category that's like festivals that are very specific to, or maybe it's not so easy. Like there are festivals that are really huge. Like the jazz festival is really huge, and Les Franco, which is a music festival that is like on right now, that's like really huge, and that's addressed to a very broad audience. Um, and a number of their events are free and also in public space. And yeah, those festivals draw in audiences. Yeah, they're just larger. They're just larger, and so they bring in broader audiences, I think is what I'm trying to say. And then there are festivals like FTA who have a very specific significance for a discipline, an artistic discipline, for dance, for theater, for cinema, for the visual arts. And those are like a bit smaller in size, and they still have a place within the cultural identity of Montreal. And when people talk about Montreal's festivals, they are definitely included. But I think what they contribute is less numbers and more like something like relevance or specific colors to the cultural identity, not like the big visibility, maybe.
Rather and that's always like less people, but loud
Yeah,
people also.
maybe. Yes, 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 yes. Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't know if you want to speak some on something else. I really appreciate everything you can have shared. I'm very sorry if I overstep something or
Not
too
at
much.
all.
But if you wanna say something else, I don't. I think I have enough.
Yeah, no, I think this is great. I can't think of anything that I want to say in addition. So,
Ah, no, pues te agradezco mucho, mucho, de verdad. Sé que debes estar cansada. Estás terminando el festival. Todavía con pendientes, me imagino.